you combine this deck with the Fallout Energy Precon, you would create one complete and focused energy precon.
You know, he's probably right. We could probably actually do that, like, right now. I think the professor has it right. I think that recently we have been given a couple of precons that are eerily similar to one another, and the biggest problem between the two of them is that one of them's 80% of the way there and one of them's like 20% of the way there. Now, I love Liberty Prime from the Fallout Precon. I do, but the face commander of that Precon certainly did a whole lot more to feel like she was an energy-themed commander. Being able to draw cards by paying energy, being able to use energy to recur artifacts from the graveyard, and being able to use energy to make a creature have haste and be a little bit more evasive. All of those things are fantastic, and when combined with what Liberty Prime was offering, you had a pretty good aggro strategy. The problem is that strategy wasn't really an energy-focused strategy. We're going to go over the Fallout Precon real quick, and then we'll go over the Creative Energy Precon, but I want to say real quick that in terms of what these decks' game plans are, Satya Aetherflux Genius is far more straightforward. While he doesn't have the modality, on paper at least, that Dr. Madison Lee has, the ability to create copies of any creature on your board and then generate energy to keep that creature around is fantastic. And there's a lot of interesting synergies we can take with this. But my only problem is that neither of these decks have a Meteor Golem, and being able to spam Meteor Golems with Satya would be perfect, especially since his alternate commander, Kaith, also had the ability to create copies of copies, which again, Meteor Golem stuff. But anyways, we're not going to worry about any of that. We are going to go into each of these decks' game plan very quickly, and then we are going to build instead a new deck out of the ashes. Quickly, let's do an overview of both of these decks to see where they succeed and where they fail, and if we can find a good in-between for them. The Dr. Madison Lee deck obviously looks on paper like it wants to be a strong energy deck, but then we have to look at the aggro sub-theme and also ask ourselves the question, what is the deck really trying to accomplish? Unfortunately, for almost every single deck so far that we've gotten that is a Universes Beyond deck, they are built well, but they are also hodgepodges of multiple different kinds of strategies that don't really synergize completely well together, because one of the jobs these decks have is putting a whole bunch of different legendary creatures that are built and designed from the ground up to be commanders in their own right. This does cause us to end up with a precon that has a lot of other things it has. We've got Sentinel Sarah Loins, who's a very good artifact aggro commander, but not really great for energy, and James Wandering Dad, who's got a really cool investigate ability with a very mild synergy with Liberty Prime's ability when you drop him on the ground. But none of these things really scream energy deck, and even this one doesn't scream artifact aggro deck. It just kind of screams, we needed to fit James somewhere in here because people liked Fallout 3. So because of that, we need to figure out which cards in this deck need to go, because a lot of them simply do not fit with our deck's theme, and we're trying to go for a strong energy theme. Looking at the deck in total, there are 4 cards that give us counters matters strategies, with cards like Steel Overseer being only 1/1 counters specifically. The deck also has Panharmonicon, which is wonderful since it will give us more energy counters for energy ETBs, really, really good synergies, but stuff like Sentry Bot is only okay. It enters the battlefield giving you energy for every creature attacking you, but it doesn't stop those creatures from attacking you. It's a very weirdly designed card. I don't hate the card, I just don't think it's doing a whole lot here. Into the draw engine, we've got lots of options here. Thirst for Knowledge and Unexpected Windfall being very basic draw pieces, but cards like Mystic Forge having a much stronger top end. But Then we've got things like Nick Valentine, who has the ability to investigate whenever it or another artifact we control dies, which would be cool if we were trying to sacrifice a lot of artifact creatures, but that's not really what our deck is going for. One with the Machine is a neat piece of draw, but again, this only really matters if we're trying to get large cost artifacts on the board, which, don't get me wrong, we are, but there are some stronger ways to draw. I think One with the Machine is better if Liberty Prime was our commander at the top end, since it would always be a draw 5. Then we look at the energy gain section of the deck, and some of these things are really promising. Behemoth of Vault Zero will have a lot of ability to work with Satya or any other energy commander, but on its own in this deck, I actually don't like it. But we'll see what it looks like when we start working on the deck later. The T-45 Power Armor is neat, but it really only works if we're trying to go with a Voltron sub-theme, which we would be if Liberty Prime was our commander, which is the same feeling I have for cards like Plasma Caster. A lot of these look like they are here so that the Liberty Prime secondary commander of the deck has a lot of stuff that allows it to shine, and that makes sense. The idea of these precons is to create a deck that will function well enough regardless of which character you put in the front end. And I like that, but it does cause just about every precon to feel like it is split down the middle in terms of the strategies it is trying to employ. And that's not what we're trying to go for. We want to go for something that feels nice, focused, and trying to do just one thing. Do the energy stuff, pay us off for the energy stuff. I do like Vault 112 in here. The ability to trade off stunning some of our creatures and then dig deep into our deck for a borderline omniscient style spell is fantastic, and a wonderful payoff and a wonderful win condition that we may have access to later. But then we once again find ourselves in the random legendary creatures that have to be here because we have to represent the original IP category. Paladin Dance can exile itself to give each creature we have that's human indestructible, or if it's human or an artifact, and that's okay. There are some different ways we could have put this in this precon, some different protection effects. Maybe a Guardian of Faith would have been a little better for this specific thing, but again, we need to have some of those characters represented. Then when we look at the ramp package of the deck, things get a little more confused. I'm super happy to see a suite of talismans in here, and Wayfarer's Bauble, and of course Solemn Simulacrum, but then Nuka-Cola Vending Machine is just kind of here. It's making us treasures and slowly ramping us, kind of. But I think it works best in a deck that desperately wants to be sacrificing artifacts as its main theme, which is a really easy thing to accomplish with other commanders, not necessarily what we are going to be using. Red Death has a strange group huggy effect in here, which, again, this is a product of having to put so many different legendary creatures in a deck. Intelligence Bobblehead and Endurance Bobblehead are also very neat. I don't hate them in here. Every Fallout deck had a couple of Bobbleheads. They're interesting. The removal and interaction suite of both of these decks is a bit lacking, but we're focusing on Madison Lee right now. I like the inclusion of Dispatch and Swords to Plowshares. They're both very low mana removal, and Crush Contraband gives access to some really easy modality when it comes to getting rid of any number of problems. If you've got an Omniscience and a Bolus of Citadel on the board, you can now get rid of both of them. Vault 13 is also kind of interesting in terms of making sure the deck has a saga that talks about some of the lore in the series. Again, these are interesting ideas. They just don't do a whole lot for what we're trying to do. I do like Electrosiphon, though. I included it in my Liberty Prime deck when I built that, and I think we're going to include it in the final version of the deck here. It is nice that this deck has a tokens sub-theme, which will combine really well with the tokens sub-theme of the other commander decks, so that's at least decent. The land suite is okay. I really wish that we would stop getting temples in every single precon, but what are you going to do? Some people actually really do enjoy destroy temples. But the inclusion of the artifact lands here may actually help us out a lot when fleshing out the final version of the deck. Moving on to creative energy, Satya looks like he's a much more interesting commander than something like Madison Lee. While Madison Lee gives us a bunch of options for what to spend energy on, Satya feels like a commander who is actively making energy work for him, as opposed to being kind of a clunky build around. This means that our deck should be able to run with or without Satya, but will certainly be much faster once Satya is online. He's got Menace and Haste, and anytime he attacks, he'll make a tapped and attacking token copy of any non-token creature we have. Then we'll get energy, and we can spend energy to keep that token around if we so choose. Right off the bat, the interaction suite of the deck is doing a little bit better in that it's using 4 board wipes instead of just 1. The only weird one to me is the Aether Squall Ancient. I'm sure some people really like this card, but I personally don't enjoy having a 7 mana, sometimes bounces all other creatures to their hand every now and again card. I'd rather the more reliable options that are in the deck, like Austere Command and Farewell. Though if you want to keep Aether Squall Ancient in your deck, by all means, it is a neat card, and it does pair well with the energy sub-theme. We also have Localized Destruction in here, which gives us energy and then allows us to pay energy to keep certain creatures on the board and then blow up everything else on the board. So it's a very nice, sometimes asymmetric board wipe that's in the deck. The draw package of the deck is also stacked really well, so the deck can dig through itself very, very quickly. I very much enjoy Unstable Amulet being in here. This is a wonderful payoff for energy, giving us access to the top card of our deck all the time. Royal Cartographer also lets us use excess energy to dig through our deck very, very quickly, and I think having Bident of Thassa in here really helps solidify that if we're going to be making tokens and going aggro at people, we should be able to get a lovely payoff for that. Aetherworks Marvel is also doing a lot of work in here, because if any permanent we control is put into the graveyard, we can get an energy counter very, very quickly. This means that any of those cards that investigated or created treasure tokens that were in the Fallout Precon now have a wonderful home, but do note that we don't want to split our deck's themes too terribly much. But Aetherworks Marvel does work very well, at the very least with the token that Satya creates. Being able to let us pay 6 to look at the top 6 of our library and then cast any of them for free, this is just another Unstable Amulet for us. It's great. The only weird include here to me is Grenzo, who gives us Impulse Draw and Goading every now and again, and I don't quite understand why he's here, but I mean, hey, we got a Grenzo here. The deck also has a much wider suite of energy gaining cards, whereas the energy precon for the Fallout deck had us looking at about, how many do we have here? 12 cards that gave energy, and some of them wanted to spend that energy immediately in the case of Liberty Prime. We have 15 cards that can grant us energy flat out in this deck, and some of them have some really cool synergies with the commander. I'm especially looking at Razorfield Ripper, where all of our excess energy can be converted into having a giant rhino that can either deal tons of damage on its own or be equipped to something else that can deal tons of damage. Maybe in the combined version, we can just combine this with Liberty Prime for the biggest America fist possible. But I digress. Looking at the rest of the cards in the suite, a lot of these function because they have enter the battlefield effects or are otherwise doing a lot more work for us. Whirler Virtuoso has great synergy with Satya in that it creates energy and then gives us the ability to make Thopters if we want, but we can just keep on cloning this with our commander if we need to. And Bespoke Battle Wagon is funny for real-life meme reasons, let's be honest. I also like things like Aetherswarm Rock, which has a more wonderful synergy with the commander. Anytime that a creature touches the battlefield, we can get more energy, and our commander is always creating tokens, so this synergy is very, very wonderful to see. In the ramp package of the deck, this deck is completely stacked. Not only is it running the Talisman suite like the original deck with Wayfarer's Bauble, Solemn Simulacrum, we also have some other very, very cool cards to look at, like Solar Transformer and Hourglass of the Lost. The Hourglass lets us remove time counters to reanimate lots of things from our graveyard, and the Solar Transformer gives us energy when it touches the battlefield, which is incredibly helpful for our deck, being able to focus on the strategy we're trying to go for with the energy while also just being a mana rock. I love having this added utility. The only strange include for me is the Coveted Jewel. This sees itself in a few commander decks every now and again, and I've never quite understood who this is for outside of a group hug person, but hey, it's an interesting card. I don't hate the card completely, so if you want to keep it, you can. But moving on, Filigree Racer gives us 4 energy when it touches the battlefield. If you animate this with its crew ability, every time Satya spawns this, you'll make 4 energy for the Racer and 2 energy for Satya. And the token copy of the card is a creature, so I don't know if it converts back to the vehicle afterwards. Maybe you'll have to ask your local judge if you can keep Filigree Racer forever when you create tokens with Satya. Jolted Awake is another interesting include, though it may not stay in the final deck. The only weird part for me is how sparse the deck is on single target removal. We still have a Swords to Plowshare, Skyclave Apparition has wonderful synergy with the commander, Confiscation Coup is on flavor theme, and Blaster Hulk is both flavorful and has wonderful synergy with our commander, but we don't have much single target removal besides that. Maybe they expect us to be playing with ourselves more often than not. The token sub-theme for the deck is also very, very interesting. So not only do we have things like Mere Battlesphere, which synergize with the commander a ton, we've got some strange includes like Silver Quill Lecturer. I've never been a fan of Demonstrate because I don't like giving my opponents free shit, honestly. But cards like Legion Loyalty have really good synergy. These let us have our commander's ability online all the time, even when our commander is in the command zone and unable to come out, because Legion Loyalty will create token copies of all of our creatures, just like our commander is. I honestly may just make a Satya deck on its own and see how far I can get for $15 later, but for now we're just combining Precons. The deck also has a very good win con package in that Akroma's Will usually win the game outright if you are playing aggro. Lightning Runner is super interesting, giving us extra combats for energy. Salvation Colossus is ridiculously strong, and creating an extra copy of this with our commander means that Salvation Colossus is always going to be swinging for 11 on its own, along with its brother that's created with Satya. I really like Salvation Colossus. Also, the fact that it has Unearth, we can just bring it out of the graveyard for energy and then just hold onto it for a long period of time, is great. And if you've got a ton of excess energy, being able to stack Salvation Colossi on top of one another with our commander is fantastic. And Gonti's Aetherheart is here so that, you know, if you really feel like having friends was a bit of a chore for you, you can take a bunch of extra turns if you need. This will not be in the final version of the deck. I don't care. I don't like extra turn cards. I do not like monopolizing the time of everybody at the table. And I wish Wizards of the Coast would print fewer of these, because I do not enjoy sitting at a table where somebody goes, I'm just going to take a bunch of extra turns. This is fun for me. Is it fun for all of you? I just want them to demonstrate the line that they're going to use to win and then leave and go play with somebody else. But moving on, the land suite for the deck is a little lacking compared to the original deck. We have a suite of temples, we have a suite of reveal lands, a couple of pain lands, and then a few bounce lands. Not the worst start for any player, but I really feel like these decks weren't trying to be a start for somebody. They were trying to be aimed at established players, which is why they have more complicated synergies that only established players care about, like Jund Goips or, you know, energy. That said, let's go ahead and see what we can do when we combine these decks together. For the final version of the deck, I've decided to go with Satya, mainly because, as I said before, he just makes energy work for him. He's not a more awkward payoff for the energy like Madison Lee is. He isn't trying to gobble the energy up specifically just to function like Liberty Prime, and he's not split between being a kind of token, kind of not sub-theme like our last commander is. So, looking at Satya, I think we are going to keep all of the other commanders in the deck, but otherwise, we're going to see what our 99 looks like from here. For our core strategy, you already know we are starting with Satya, and the idea is to have energy work for us, either by generating tons of creatures with wonderful enter the battlefield effects that Satya can take advantage of, or by generating enough energy so that we can do a myriad of wonderful things. To this end, we've decided to keep only one Counters Matter card from the original deck, and that is Panharmonicon. If an artifact or creature enters the battlefield and it triggers an ability of a permanent, then we can trigger that ability an additional time. I'm not the biggest fan of doubling effects, but in this particular deck, it will make a lot of energy for us. So, on top of that, we have a few other ways to gain energy. Beginning with the stuff we've kept from the Fallout Precon, Robobrain Warmind gives us energy when it enters the battlefield, so that is prime for using Satya's ability, and whenever it attacks, we can pay energy to draw a card if we need to. Behemoth of Vault Zero is a wonderful card for Satya to clone, as it gives us 4 energy when it touches the battlefield, and we can make sure that it dies every single turn by, just letting the token die instead of paying the energy into keeping our Behemoth of Vault Zero token. When this dies, we can pay an amount of energy equal to a non-land permanent's mana value and then destroy it, giving us easy access to removal. Vault 112 is being kept as well because that's effectively an Omniscient style win con in it. Just being able to pay any amount of energy and then shuffle our library, exile that many cards from the top, and play any of those cards without paying their mana cost, that is a ridiculously strong win con. The Mother Lode Excavator is being kept in here as well, as it is an artifact creature that we can repeatedly create with Satya, even if it will auto-die to Satya's ability, because it does keep legendary rule stuff. I don't think that's the worst thing in the world, because when it enters the battlefield, choose an opponent, gain an amount of energy equal to the number of non-basic lands that player controls. If a player is running a decently high budget deck, they've probably got a lot of non-basic lands on the board. This can be a very quick way to give us an energy surplus if we need. The Automated Assembly line is being kept in the deck as well, as it does give us a payoff for all the times we are going to be swinging. 2 mana so that we can just generate energy whenever we attack is perfectly fine by me. Then we have Liberty Prime, who of course I'm keeping all the original commanders in. Liberty Prime Recharge has Vigilance, Trample, Haste, and whenever it attacks or blocks, we sacrifice it unless we pay 2 energy. But we can also use it to sack artifacts to give us energy and draw us cards. I really, really like Liberty Prime in the command zone, but again, just not what we're doing in this deck. From the original Energy Precon, the new one, we are keeping a lot more cards. Era of Innervation, whenever an Artificer enters the battlefield or an artifact enters the battlefield, we can pay 1 to get 2 energy. We can also pay mana we'll never pay to draw 3 cards, but just in general, this is a good mana battery, or a good energy battery for us. Whirler Virtuoso, because cloning this with Satya is fantastic. Aether Geode Miner is being kept due to the fact that we can just clone it with our commander and swing the clone repeatedly to generate 2 energy and never really care if the card dies. Aether Swarm Rock is being kept because we can use this to generate a surplus of energy anytime our commander creates a token. We can also use it to keep dragons from blocking us by putting a tapping ability on things by just paying energy. That's a fine ability to have access to, and I don't hate it. Stone Idol Generator also will give us energy anytime one of our creatures attacks, and we can create Colossi when we need them. Decotion Module does a lot of work here because it lets us return our commander to our hand, avoiding commander attacks if we need to, and it also lets us generate energy whenever a creature enters the battlefield. Remember, we kept Panharmonicon, so that's going to be very important in the deck. Razorfield Ripper is being kept because this card generates energy when it attacks or when the creature is equipped to attacks, and then we get XX, where X is the amount of energy we have. All the surplus energy in the deck will be used to make the Razorfield Ripper either give things like Liberty Prime or Aether Swarm Rock a giant hammer to bludgeon somebody with. It's just a good card. I love this thing. Aura Shifter is being kept because it is a very modal clone that has energy payoffs attached to it, and Raptor is fantastic. If we cast this card from our hand, we can then get cards from our deck and play them without having to spend mana. We can just play them by spending energy. And also, the Amped Raptor can be cloned, which, while it won't give us that impulse play ability of the Amped Raptor, it will give us extra energy, and that's perfectly fine. Aether Refinery is generating more energy for our deck, and I think that is a wonderful thing to keep in here as well. Getting double energy is fantastic. Lightning Greaves is being kept from the original deck because keeping our commander alive and well and healthy is very, very important. We're also using some of the recursion suite from the Fallout deck so that we can make sure that our artifacts can touch the board all the time. We are using 37 artifacts in this deck, so being able to do things like open the vaults and return all the artifacts and enchantments from graveyards to the battlefield, we're going to try to be the one that benefits from this more than anyone else. Wake the Past is a better version of this because this will give only us that ability, but if we have to use Open the Vaults, we will. Elder Owen Linos is also an interesting include in here because it has great synergy with our commander. When it ETBs or dies, we get an artifact from our graveyard back to our hand. So we clone this with Satya, and we get 2 artifacts to our hand automatically because it's automatically going to die to the legendary rule. Always let the token die, keep the original on the board, and we can keep getting tons and tons of artifacts back from our grave at basically no cost. Then we have Filigree Racer, which, as I said, creates 4 energy tokens or energy counters rather, as long as we have crewed it. And I think that's a wonderful way to generate energy and also get instant and sorceries back from our graveyard if we need. The deck's only running 7 sorceries and 6 instants, but it's still a perfectly viable way to cause havoc for our opponents. We're also going to be using a lot of the token production from the last 2 decks, starting with Legion Loyalty. Again, we have so many cards with good enter the battlefield effects. This will give us a lot of those over and over and over again. Whirler Rogue is an interesting one because we can create copies of this with our commander and repeatedly generate extra Thopter tokens. Brutaclad can turn all of the extra tokens we've created into whatever we want. We can make some nutty plays with Brutaclad. If you've never used this card, oh boy. In token strategies, he does a lot of work. Being able to make a token in his own right every turn, and then being able to turn all of your tokens into copies of 1 token. Remember, our commander can make a token copy of any creature we have at all, so there are some insane plays we can make with this. Then we have Mere Battlesphere, enters the battlefield and creates 4 1/1 colorless Thopter tokens, and also, or colorless mirror tokens. It also has the ability to burn people when it attacks by generating lots of mirrors and tapping them. If we constantly make copies of the Mirror Battlesphere with Satya, we can then use all the extra mirror we create and just swing only with the Battlesphere token itself and generate tons and tons of burn damage this way. Then we have Kaith, Famed Mechanist. This card can let us either populate or proliferate if we need, and all non-token creatures we have get Fabricate 1, meaning we can create lots of tokens for things like Brutaclad to see. You can use Mirror Battlesphere to create mirrors, use Brutaclad to turn every single token on your board into a mirror, and then create a token copy of Mirror Battlesphere with Satya to create even more mirrors, and then swing the token copy of Mirror Battlesphere into somebody and burn them for like 20 or 30 damage. Legion Loyalty is also a fantastic thing to combine with all of these effects. We're keeping a decent few cards from the WinCon package of Satya, like Akroma's Will, giving all of our creatures a slew of keywords. Salvation Colossus, because I'm going to be honest, I'm just going to go ahead and show you the line. Let's say that you've got Brutaclad out, okay? And you've got a bunch of tokens on the board already because you've used things like Whirler Rogue and Mirror Battlesphere, what have you. And then you have Salvation Colossus on the board. Then you create a token copy of Salvation Colossus because of Satya. Then Brutaclad says, oh, okay, then I'm going to go ahead and turn every single thing on your board into a copy of Salvation Colossus. If you've got 10 creatures, now suddenly your entire board has plus 20 plus 20, or plus 18 plus 18. You do the math yourself. Then that's a bunch of flying vigilance trample creatures with plus 18 plus 18. Nobody survives that. Nobody builds a board state that survives that unless they're running like 5 fogs, okay? I told you, Brutaclad does nutty things in this deck. Salvation Colossus is how you do the nuttiest of nutty things. Lightning Runner also is being kept in here because it can generate energy when it attacks. It's got double strike, and then we can pay 8 to untap all creatures we control and give ourselves another combat phase. So, Here's another play. Let's say you've got 4 tokens that are currently on the board. 4 of any kind of token. Brutacloud will make another token. Doesn't matter. You choose to make a copy of the Lightning Runner itself with our commander. Okay, cool. Now we have some extra energy, and when the Lightning Runner swings, we'll make 2 energy. But if Brutaclad has used his ability and created multiple token copies of Lightning Runner, now the Lightning Runner is going to give us infinite combats. All you need is 4 Lightning Runners and people with no blockers, or, you know, them not being able to block with enough creatures because it's a 2/2 with double strike that can be, you know, helped by things like Salvation Colossus. Now we have infinite combats, and Brutaclad is I told you, this guy is ridiculous. He does so much goddamn work. And Lightning Runner, I just need to make a Brutaclad deck with Lightning Runner as one of the win cons, because this is a insane thing not to just have access to at our fingertips. But there's so much more that we can do. Let's get into the draw package of the deck. For our draw package, we've got 11 cards here, and a lot of them are fairly simple, but some of them are serving a just wonderful purpose with our commander. Beginning with Glimmer of Genius, scry 2, draw 2, get 2 energy. Very simple. I already sung the praises of Royal Cartographer, letting us sink energy into generating lots of card draw. Izzet Genitorium is another way to double our energy counters that we produce, and it also lets us draw a card if we've been actively using energy every single turn. Dr. Madison Lee gets us the ability to give a creature trample if we need, also gives us the ability to draw a card, also gives us the ability to recur stuff. I'm going to keep this in here primarily as a draw engine, because if we are using it and the Izzet Genitorium over and over again each turn, we're drawing 2, 3, 4 extra cards a turn, so I think that is a perfectly reasonable way to go about spending our energy. Bident of Thassa is a wonderful payoff for our ability to just be an aggro tokens deck. Unstable Amulet gives us impulse draw for energy. Sinks of Revelation lets us generate energy anytime we gain life. So here's what you do. You play the Sphinx of Revelation, then you have Satya create a clone of the Sphinx. Then the Sphinx of Revelation and its clone punch people repeatedly, generating 8 energy every time. We can then use the Sphinx later to draw lots of cards with our excess energy, but primarily just being able to generate 4 energy every time we punch somebody with this thing is great. Tesseret's Gambit lets us proliferate while also drawing us cards. Combustible Gearhulk enters the battlefield and makes an opponent make a bad choice. They either let us draw 3 cards or they basically burn to death, because we mill those 3 and then they take a ton of damage, because our deck is very high on the mana curve, so it's very likely we are going to burn people with the Combustible Gearhulk almost every time. Mystic Forge also lets us cast artifacts on the top of our deck, of which our deck is comprised 1/3 of artifacts, and Aetherworks Marvel. Anytime permanent we have is put into the graveyard, so like anytime our commander makes a token and then it dies, we get an energy counter. We can then pay 6 energy to look at the top 6 cards of our deck and play any of them for free, which really does a lot of work in a deck that is filled with high mana cards. But we also need to make sure our opponent's boards are kept clean, so in terms of raw removal and interaction, both decks are a bit scant, so we have to kind of pick from the scraps, as it were. We are keeping Dispatch because it's easy to trigger Metalcraft and just exile any creature. Swords to Plowshare is a basic, easy, obvious removal spell. Skyclave Apparition lets us remove cards constantly and repeatedly by creating clones of the Skyclave Apparition. Electrosiphon is our one and only counter spell we have. I'd like to add more, but the decks really didn't give us that many options. This also generates a lot of energy when we counter a card. Blaster Hulk can deal damage divided as we choose among any amount of cards, and also, or any targets, it can hit players too. And also, we can generate lots and lots of energy by just creating copies of Blaster Hulk with our commander and punching repeatedly. It also costs less for all the energy that we've lost this turn, which is great. Crush Contraband is great modal removal, and Confiscation Coup says that we can take a person's best and most favorite card, including their commander, if we need to. It's wonderfully on theme and does a wonderful job at generating us energy while also just taking problematic things off the board, but letting us keep them. And I already said that we are going to be keeping a bunch of these board wipes. Austere Command gives us access to any type of modal board wiping we need. Farewell also is great for modal board wiping, and Localized Destruction is wonderful for letting us have asymmetric board wiping if we've got the energy to pay into it, which ideally we should. But that's it for the interaction package. Let's go ahead and see how we're going to be getting the deck online. Thankfully, both of these decks were big mana decks, so getting a cohesive ramp package together was fairly simple. Beginning with Solar Transformer, it generates energy when it touches the board, and then it is a 3-mana mana rock. Otherwise, I think it's great. Then we have the Talisman Suite between Conviction, Progress, and Creativity. Very, very obvious. They just generate the mana we need. Wayfarer's Bauble can get us land out of our deck. Midnight Clock has synergy with our ability to proliferate a little bit in the deck, and it draws us cards if we need. Otherwise, it's a 3-mana mana rock. Solemn Simulacrum has great synergy with our commander. We can play it once, generate a land out of our deck, and then draw a card if it dies, but if we keep on making copies of it with Satya, we can let it die and let us draw a card and ramp a card every single turn. Conversion Apparatus gives us energy on the fly if we need, and is otherwise a 3-mana mana rock. Soul Ring is an easy include in just about any deck if you like, you know, having some fast mana. Goldspan Dragon has great synergy with our commander, as every time it attacks or becomes the target of a spell, we make a treasure token, so we can just drop it on the board, attack immediately with it and its token, giving us access to 2 treasure tokens the exact turn that we do anything. And, you know, keeping these on the board by paying the extra energy into them is not a bad idea at all, because the energy that they start creating will stack up very, very quickly. The treasures they are making. Then we have Hourglass of the Lost. I really like the ability to recur stuff with this card. And then Arcane Signet. Very basic, very easy to use mana rock that is in probably everybody's deck at this point. So, honestly, the ramp package of the deck was really easy to do, and also combining these two decks together gave us one of the most cohesive Precon, quote, land bases you can think of. So looking here already, we've got access to Port Town, so we have a reveal land. We've got access to filter lands like Skycloud Expanse. Prairie Stream is a sometimes untapped, sometimes not land. We've got the artifact lands in here as well for our cards that can do things like recur artifacts in case we have to discard these or mill them or what have you. We can just get lands back that way. I love having access to these new filters, but so many of these cards do not come into play tapped. Being able to put 17 dual lands where only a handful of them come into play tapped, and only because they've got some other benefit to us, is just great and fantastic. We have a suite of pain lands. We have a suite of check lands. We have an actual honest to God Azorius filter land. And then we've got the original the Odyssey filter lands in here as well. And then, you know, we've got a single copy of a bicycle land we can use if the time comes where that becomes necessary. And we've got the reveal lands. Just a fantastic land suite by combining these two decks together. Then in the fetching land section, we've got Evolving Wilds, Terramorphic Expanse, and Ash Barrens. I would like to put more than just these in this deck, but we have to work with what the Precons came with. And for Omni lands, we've got a bunch. Spire of Industry gives us mana of any color so long as we have an artifact. Remember, those artifact lands will help with that. Mystic Monastery can tap for any mana that our deck has. Command Tower can as well. Exotic Orchard usually will. Aether Hub can if we pay energy into it. Otherwise, it just generates energy when it touches the board. We've got utility lands like Demolition Field to blow up our opponent's lands if we need. Buried Ruin if we want to recur artifacts. And Helios 1 to generate lots and lots of energy with our excess mana every single turn. I keep this in the Liberty Prime deck, and you should keep it in just about any energy deck that you are making. And then we have 8 basic lands, 3 islands, 3 plains, and 2 mountains. And that does it for the deck itself. So In conclusion, Satya is a wonderful energy commander, and we should be able to use a myriad of enter the battlefield effects to make absolute bonkers use of his token creation ability. Also, the ability to create a token of any creature that we have and then synergize that with stuff like Brutaclad so that we can turn our entire board into copies of those token creatures is absolutely ridiculous. Imagine having a surplus of, say, 20 energy, and then you create a Razor Field Ripper, and then you use Brutaclad to turn about 8 or 9 mirrors into copies of that Razor Field Ripper, and now they are all swinging at somebody for 23, and there's not a damn thing they can do about all of these rhinos just pounding their shit in. I think this is a fantastically designed commander, and I think the professor was right in that somewhere between these two decks is a incredibly cohesive energy deck. Give this challenge a try for yourself. See what you come up with combining these two together. Tell me what you cut. Tell me if you disagree with some of the things that I decided to cut. Let me know how this deck ends up playing for you. I know a lot of people have enjoyed Satya right outside the box, but my personal thought is Satya's about 80% of the way there outside of the box, and Madison Lee, for an energy commander, was only about 20% of the way there. So we combine them together, and we've got damn near a perfect energy deck to play around with. I would just like to see a few more cards like, say, Meteor Golem in this deck, not only because it's a precon and Meteor Golem goes in a lot of precons, but also Satya is an enters the battlefield commander that benefits from artifact synergies because energy cards can benefit from artifact synergies, so it's a weird card not to include. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you haven't already, and as always, everybody, insert end of video tagline here. Oh, yeah, as always, the deck list will be in the description.
Hey, I just quickly want to give a thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who keep this show running. YouTube and Twitch are a pretty bumpy ride at the best of times, and the stability that Patreon provides me is worth more than I can say here. I'd also like to thank each and every one of my $20 and up patrons here, and they would be Red Joker, Blitzkrieg, Cameron, Dren, Jemshin, Smiling DM, Poundini, Mabbity Babbity, Naomi, Isaac, Agamotto, Jordan, Ravi, Giuni, Kiratorian, Prisma, all of you, I'm not saying that part, and Starlight. And finally, thank you to everyone else that helps keep this channel alive. While you're here, why not check out another video? And thank you for watching.